Welcome to Facing the Future, brought to you by the Concord Coalition. I'm your host, Bob Bixby. This week, we'll talk about the consequences of a chaotic federal budget process with Tom Kahn. He's the longest serving House Budget Committee staff director in history, serving from 1997 to 2016. And Tom is now at the American University, where he was recently named director of AU's Center for Congressional and Presidential Studies. He also has teaching credentials at AU, earning the school's Outstanding Teaching Award in 2023, not 1923. Tom, we're old, but we're not that old. Okay.
Feels that way, Bob.
During his time on Capitol Hill, Tom participated in many memorable moments on the budget, including the 1997 Balanced Budget Act. Those were the days. The Bush tax cuts, the Simpson-Bowles negotiation, many debt ceiling negotiations, the Super Committee, and right up until the Affordable Care Act. He's also been a frequent guest on Facing the Future. Tom, welcome back to the show.
It's great to be back, Bob. Thank you very much for the invitation. We're really looking forward to it.
This seemed like a great time to talk to you because Congress has gone home, leaving the budget process in a total mess. We say that every year, but it seems to get worse. I mean, no appropriation bills have passed. The Senate hasn't even passed any of them in the Senate. The House has passed 3.
Right.
There's no budget resolution. Where do you see things right now? I mean, what is the status of the budget that we've been left over this brief summer recess?
Well, the whole budget process, unfortunately, has been abused and misused, and it's through a whole series of acts, a result of polarization within the Congress, leadership control, difficulty in passing anything in the Senate without reconciliation, members who no longer really care at all about reducing deficit or debt. Now you see the reconciliation process being used to pass appropriations bills, which it was absolutely never designed to do. So, and everything is being controlled now by leadership, not by the committees. So everything's been turned upside down. And I think it's much worse now because we're only about 90 days from an election. So I think members of Congress are, particularly both parties are very much focused on November 3rd and doing whatever they can as quickly as they can and then get out of town. But it is complete chaos. And just to your earlier point, when you said that the Senate has not passed any appropriations bills, in fact, the Senate Appropriations Committee is not even marked up an appropriations bill because of the disagreement over the 302 allocations. So they don't even have an agreement on a top line number.
Yeah, I don't remember them working on what we call a CR, a continuing resolution, this early. I mean, the House was passed a CR in July, just pretty much saying we've given up on the regular appropriations bill. And they're supposed to pass 12 regular appropriations bills to fund the government. And then before the fiscal year begins in October, if they don't do that, that's when we get into this government shutdown thing. And, we're nowhere close. So what do we lose by governing by just a series of continuing resolutions?
We lose a lot. We lose, for example, number one, any kind of a process by which what you really want policymakers to do when you're dealing with a budget of $7, $8, $9 trillion, you want them to sit back and make decisions about priorities, where we should best spend the money. Are we spending too much money? Are we spending not enough money? Where should we allocate resources? Are taxes too high? Are taxes too low? Are we taxing too many people in a certain direction? You want your policymakers to weigh these different options, and then the budget should reflect that. That's what it's designed to do. Instead, everything is done in an emergency ad hoc basis. Essentially, the only part of the budget which gets any kind of a review these days is the narrow discretionary part, the discretionary spending part of defense and non-defense. That is to say that the largest spenders, which is Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and I might add now, the fastest growing part of the mandatory spending, which is debt service, does not get any oversight at all. So it is a miserable way to budget. And I think the American people pay the price for it.
Yeah, and just looking ahead, asking you to speculate a little bit, putting on your pundit hat here. We've got so the House has passed one version of the continuing resolution. The Senate has passed a different version. It's not clear to me that they're going to be able to resolve their differences. The Senate actually stuck in a provision that kind of curtails some of the executive branch authority, and we can get into that later. But there were some provisions in it that might not go down well at the White House and hence the House of Representatives. I'm just wondering, they've only got a couple of weeks to work together in September.
Yes.
Are they even going to be able to do something between themselves, between the House and Senate?
Well, it's a good question, and you're built into your question is an important point. One of the items that the Senate put into the CR was a freeze on this proposal by OMB to essentially give the administration wide authority to use political subjective decisions to make grants, so that typically grant money is handed out based on a whole series of criteria where there's certain factors that are delineated through either regulations or through statute. It's done through a process of expertise, and it's done on a process of meritocracy. But this OMB proposal would essentially, by some accounts, turn into a slush fund that would give OMB wide berth to give out or deny grants because they don't happen to like the grantee for political reasons or whatever. So thankfully, of course, that's my opinion. I'm sure others would have different views, different perspective on that. But in any case, the Senate froze the process for this OMB regulation, which is not yet gone into effect. It's hard to imagine the administration ever allowing that freeze to signing a bill with that freeze in it. I'm told, or supposedly, the House passed CR does not contain any so-called poison pills. I haven't studied it, but based on history, typically the House puts provisions into CRs, what they even call clean CRs, that are controversial. So conferencing that is going to be a very arduous process. By the way, once you also add in the SAFE Act, which the president is single-mindedly focused on enacting, this is the provision that would require photo proof of citizenship in order for individuals to vote. It has a whole series of other provisions there are not 60 votes in order to pass it, and it doesn't fit in the reconciliation. He is very unhappy that it hasn't already passed. So one can imagine this thing is going to go on a long time. I think one of the interesting questions both parties are going to have to ask is, if there is a government shutdown in October 1st, that's when government runs out, which party does that benefit or hurt? Because everybody's going to be focusing on November 3rd. And does the government shutdown, will Democrats be blamed for it? In which case Democrats will want to cut a deal, or will Republicans be blamed for it, in which case they'll want to cut a deal? So that's a political calculation beyond my ability.
Yeah, I think there's some transfer authority for border control fund in there also that the Senate is putting restrictions on. So it does seem to me that if the Senate holds out for its version, it's going to be it could be very difficult to resolve. And I think the Democrats would probably be happy with that result, because they would probably make the case that Republicans were, caving to the administration's demands. So I could see
Yeah.
It's kind of a mess. On,
And I think the fact that the chairwoman of the of the Senate Appropriations Committee is a senator from Maine, um, and who is up for reelection, and I think that will play into it as well.
yeah,
Um,
I think it certainly will. Okay, well, we're going to have to take our first break. We've only scratched the surface on the dysfunction going on. We'll turn our attention to reconciliation, or as they're calling it, Reconciliation 3.0. When we come back, you're listening to Facing the Future. I'm your host, Bob Bixby, and I'm talking with Tom Kahn of American University. He is a former Congressional Hill staffer, served as staff director of the House Budget Committee for 20 years, and now he has been named director of AU's Center for Congressional and Presidential Studies. We'll be right back after these short messages. Welcome back to Facing the Future. I'm your host, Bob Bixby, and I'm talking with Tom Kahn. He is director of the American University Center for Congressional and Presidential Studies, and he served as chairman. I just elevated you to chairman. Staff director of the House Budget Committee for 20 years. Tom, after that, they should have given you the gavel.
Nobody else wanted the job, and I kept showing up.
Well, okay, so turning back to the dysfunction of the budget process in Capitol Hill, as both the House and Senate are gone without having resolved anything. They couldn't pass a budget resolution. They're supposed to do that back in April. They're supposed to pass a budget resolution that serves as a guideline for spending and taxes, deficits and debt for the rest of the year. They did not do that. We talked about how they haven't passed the appropriation bills. So they are now, even at this late date, trying to pass a budget resolution for the sole purpose, as you mentioned before, of unlocking this reconciliation power to pass a reconciliation bill. There are a lot of things. Now, the House has its own version, which they passed. The Senate has a version of its own, which they haven't passed. But Tom, there are just a lot of atrocities for longtime budgeteers about these reconciliation bills. Why don't you tee up your
Sure.
favorite problems?
Well, first of all, reconciliation should really be designed to reduce the deficit. And that's the way it was used in the late 80s, certainly in the 90s. Um, the, the, the piece of legislation that I'm most proud of in my 33 years was the 1997 balanced budget reconciliation bill that was written by John Kasich, Newt Gingrich, Bill Clinton, my boss John Spratt, Pete Domenici. It was a very, very toughly negotiated bill. There was lots of give and take. But ultimately, we actually, through this bill that nobody loved, but everybody lived with, we balanced the budget for 4 years in a row. And it was an enormous achievement. Imagine balanced budgets 4 years in a row. We were actually paying down debt. Now we're in a world in which reconciliation is simply used as a vehicle, well, to pass big spending bills or tax cuts that actually add to the deficit. What we're seeing today, which is sort of even is bad as well, is that reconciliation was designed to adjust mandatory spending, revenue, or the debt ceiling. In fact, that is listed in the Budget Act. Those are the three purposes of reconciliation. That's what reconciliation under the Byrd Rule can change. What we're now seeing is that discretionary spending, appropriated spending, which is not supposed to be part of reconciliation, is now being converted, called, declared mandatory spending, and it is now part of this new budget resolution and what may be a reconciliation bill. By the way, it was also part of the second reconciliation bill that they passed. Among the bad things this is doing is this is completely eroding the power of the Appropriations Committee. You want the Appropriations Committee every year to take a pot of money and to make judgments and to weigh its options and merits and demerits of how money should be spent. But when you start lopping money away for the Department of Homeland Security, or lop money away for $1.5 trillion for the Pentagon, then you don't really have an appropriations process anymore. And that's what we're seeing now, sadly, is more and more of the appropriation money is being eaten away in really a twisted around version of reconciliation.
Yeah. I mean, of course, the purpose of reconciliation, as you said, was originally we all thought of it as a deficit reduction thing, and the reason it's so popular among the leadership is it's a fast track method and it gets around the Senate filibuster. I mean, that's its procedural advantage. And what strikes me now is, as you said, it's being used for certain appropriations like defense and it was, I think, ICE funding in the last reconciliation bill.
Basically, the budget process and reconciliation are now being seen in a very narrow way as a vehicle to pass something through the Senate with 51 votes. Period. End of discussion. And it doesn't matter what it is. It could be anything, but you can't get 60 votes, and so you're going to use reconciliation. And it really is an undoing of the budget process. Look, you just kind of take a step back and put all this into context. We have a debt and deficit that is absolutely unsustainable right now. We have a debt as a percentage of GDP is closest to the largest it's been in American history, because you know this, Bob, because you've dedicated your life to it. We are in uncharted waters, and we need a budget process that is going to be able to put priorities in place and figure out how we can get our hands around this debt that is just growing and growing and growing, and very soon will be the biggest in history. We now have debt service, interest on the debt, which is $1 trillion a year. $1 trillion a year, which goes simply out the door to bondholders. It is a complete waste of money in the sense that it doesn't build a single school, it doesn't build a single tank, it doesn't pay for a single school lunch program, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's the fastest part of the growing budget. It was at one point, and it's continuing to grow, and it squeezes out other things that we need. So putting that aside, our debt is contributing to higher interest rates, to higher inflation, slower growth. And at some point, we're going to have to pay this debt back. And yet, our lawmakers, our policymakers, instead of addressing this, examining this, even asking these questions, are playing all sorts of just ridiculous little games to move little pawns on the dartboard by using reconciliation in ways it has never been designed to do.
What I mean, do we need to just start all over again with the budget process and start something new?
Well, I mean, that is one option. It certainly is an option. Before we do that, though, I'd like to see whether more modest reforms might make a difference. And I would start with these. I would put in a rule that could not be waived under any circumstances in the House or the Senate, that reconciliation can only be used to cut the deficit and cut the debt, period. It could not be used to add to the debt. Secondly, I would require that any budget resolution provide that it list all of the consequences over a 10-year period of the additional debt which it is contributing to. Thirdly, I would require that there be we've heard terms fiscal commission before, but a fiscal commission on a bipartisan basis that requires a plan that gets to deficit and debts below a certain level, and requires an up or down vote on the floor of the House and the floor of the Senate, not just a commission that can put out another report that goes on a shelf, but actually a commission that forces members of Congress to vote. You serious? You want to talk about being serious about the deficit and debt? Then damn well, here's your chance to vote on it. Um, so I think that the budget process is still a process that could work. It's not the process that's broken, unfortunately. It's the people who are misusing it.
Yeah. uh, it's yeah, it's that old Rudy Penner line about the problem isn't the process, the problem is the problem, and maybe the Kahn uh, addendum to that is the problem isn't the problem isn't the process, the problem is the people.
Well,
Problem is the people running the process. I've often wondered about that. I mean, the process on paper looks perfectly logical to me.
it is logical, and it worked for a couple of decades. You know, I don't want to completely, beat these guys up and blame them entirely. There are a number of reasons why it's not working now the way it did before. One of the reasons is that the ratios of Republicans and Democrats in the House and the Senate are so tight that every single vote is seen through the lens of is this going to get us the majority or is this going to put us into the minority? So unfortunately, policymakers make decisions much more based on what's politically advantageous than what is good policy for the country. And I will try not to sermonize, but I'll tell you, I mean, I feel passionately about this. I am so worried about the growth of our debt and growth of our deficit. And I am often reminded of that famous Hemingway quote when a character was asked, I'm sure you know it, how did you go bankrupt? And he said, two ways, slowly and then quickly. And it feels to me as if we're a country, as our debt is growing faster and faster, almost as if we're like a guy that jumped off the Empire State Building and he's at the 40th story and they say, how are you doing? He says, everything's fine so far. And I feel as if we're at the 40th story. At some point, I think it was Milton Friedman said, something that can't last forever won't. We cannot keep adding more and more debt, borrowing more and more and more, and somehow expect there will be no consequences for it. We've gotten away with it so far, but we are leaving one hell of a legacy for our kids, and we don't know when the slow bankrupting is going to come fast. But when it becomes fast, it's going to come really fast, and then the solutions are going to be so much more painful and so much more difficult for us to get out of it. And what's unfortunate is that we have a process in place, but our policymakers are unwilling to deal with it. And they're unwilling to deal with it for several reasons. And one of it is that fixing it requires you to make tough decisions. You're going to have to raise taxes and you're going to have to cut spending. And no politician wants to do either.
On that note, we're going to have to take our second break. You're listening to Facing the Future. I'm your host, Bob Bixby, and I'm talking with Tom Kahn, director of the Center for Congressional and Presidential Studies at American University. We'll be right back after these short messages. Welcome back to Facing the Future. I'm your host, Bob Bixby, and I'm talking with Tom Kahn, director of the Center for Congressional and Presidential Studies at American University, a fine institution where I got my undergraduate degree in political science.
I never do that.
Ah, well, you learn something new every day.
You're an American Eagle. All right.
That's right. Yes, deep down, I'm an American Eagle. Tom was up on the Hill for 20 years, probably more than that, but 20 years he was director of the House Budget Committee Democratic staff, longest tenure in that job in history. And so, Tom, I turn to you for another issue that's kind of bugging me about what's going on up on the Hill. And it's not just the debt and deficit, but because that bugs me quite a bit, but it's the power of the purse. I just remember when I was going to American University and learning my political science, that Congress was very jealous. Congress jealously guards its power of the purse, I was told, and that certainly was true. I mean, I think of great, senators from the past and the House, and it was always a fight over the president, over the power of the purse. I see things happening now with the executive branch taking a very aggressive approach to its own power, challenging the congressional power of the purse in a way I think could be very detrimental to our constitutional system, and apparently so far getting away with it. Do you have some thoughts on that or some?
Thank you. Thank you for asking. It's a really, really important topic. I would say that, look, anybody who reads the Constitution is very clear. Article 1 gives Congress the power to tax and spend. And that is historically logical. We all remember the Boston Tea Party. The reason that the rebels poured the British tea into Boston Harbor was that the king was imposing taxes that they did not vote for on this tea coming in. America did not want a king; it wanted a president. And in fact, when they were writing the Constitution, and the question about the power of the president was discussed, people said, "We didn't trade one King George for another King George," meaning King George, the King George of England, for George Washington. And so the power of the purse, the power to tax, and the power to spend are arguably the most powerful authorities given to the Congress. And yet what we have, and that's basically what's been going on for the last 250 years, is that Congress has been exercising its power. James Madison wrote about it. It's been all over the Federalist Papers. But what we have seen in the last 18 months is just an absolutely breathtaking, sweeping power exercised by the executive branch, subsuming the power of the Congress for its both tax and spending power. It started with the day that President Trump was sworn into office, with Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, who held no official federal office, who through an organization called Doge began to shut down federal agencies and to eliminate federal spending without any authority by Congress. He was eliminating spending that Congress had legally appropriated and that the president had signed into law, and that this individual just said, no, we're not going to do that. In fact, he shut down an entire federal agency, the Agency for International Development, that had been created by Congress. It was a statutory federal agency. We've also seen this administration impound funds, which is to say money, similar to what Elon Musk did, money Congress appropriates, the president just says, I'm not going to spend it. I'm just not going to spend it. Now, there's nothing in the Constitution which gives the president the authority to make that decision on his own. There is a Congressional Impoundment Act that was passed in 1974. Richard Nixon tried to do that, and Congress pushed back. They passed the Congressional Impoundment Act, and they said, Mr. President, if Congress appropriates money and you don't like that money, you don't think that money should be spent for whatever reason, not necessary, you don't like the policy, you have the authority to send a message to Congress and say, rescind these funds. And you can send that message. You can tell us the money you want rescind. If the House and the Senate pass that rescission package and you sign it, boom, the money is gone. That's the way money can be rescinded. But what we're seeing today, Bob, is the president is not rescinding funds. Well, he actually has had two rescission bills. But in other cases, he's simply saying, I choose not to spend the money anyway. And he's also asserting that the Congressional Impoundment Act of 1974, that's been upheld by the Supreme Court and by lower courts, is unconstitutional. He is exercising what he calls the unitary executive theory. And under this unitary executive theory, the president Congress can appropriate money and the president can choose not to spend it. So ultimately, this is an issue that will go all the way to the Supreme Court for its resolution. It is hard to imagine, based on the plain words of Article 1, that the president does have the authority that President Trump is claiming, but time will tell. But the short answer to your question is we are seeing sweeping, dramatic power exercise, both on spending and on taxes. And tariffs are a form of taxes. And of course, as we know, through what's called Independence Day or Freedom Day, the president imposed tariffs on virtually every country in the world. He didn't have the power explicitly given to him by Congress. And in that case, the Supreme Court actually pulled back. That was one case where they did so. Anyway, so that's a long answer to a short question.
Well, and that was the Supreme Court. It wasn't Congress grabbing its tariff power back. It was just the Supreme Court coming to that conclusion. And I think one of the things that it has implications for is just being able to get anything done on appropriations. There have to be negotiations between Democrats and Republicans. And if the White House is sitting there saying, well, you guys agree whatever you want to, I may sign the bills, but later on I may just decide I don't want to honor this agreement. I'm going to not spend the stuff that the other party doesn't, wanted to spend. I don't want to do it. And I mean, how do you do a negotiation? I mean, you've been in so many of them on the Hill where there's got to be that level of trust. And can Democrats and Republicans agree on spending bills if, the White House is saying, go ahead and pass it, but I may just withhold the money?
Well, exactly. It's awfully hard to think of it this way. It's like if I'm going to buy a car from you and we negotiate the price and I'm going to pay you a certain amount and we sign a contract. And after we sign the contract, you come back and say, by the way, you know what you agreed you'd pay me? I want another $2,000. You say, well, we have a contract. Well, I changed my mind. That's essentially what is going on between the administration and the Congress, to the point that Congress is now actually putting language into appropriations bills saying we're appropriating $10 billion and we expect every penny of it to be appropriated. And if it's not, then there are serious consequences for failure to do so. So there's not a lot of love lost between Congress and the White House. I will just say one other thing, because I think part of it, frankly, is the president has exercised this broad authority, but I think part of the fault lies with Congress, because Congress has failed. It goes back to what you were saying before in your question. In the old days, Congress jealously protected its powers. We remember, people like Robert Byrd, former chairman of the Appropriations Committee, who certainly would have never put up with anything like this. He jealously guarded the powers of the purse of the Congress. But this Congress, by and large, has essentially acquiesced in their loss of power. There was a White House staffer who reportedly referred to the Congress as the Duma, which was sort of a sad way of describing the fact that the Congress does not stand up to the president and is doing it a little bit more. We're seeing in the second year as elections get closer, but by and large, the Congress has let its powers be taken away.
We're going to have to take our next break. You're listening to Facing the Future. I'm your host, Bob Bixby, and I'm talking with Tom Kahn, Director of the Center for Congressional and Presidential Studies at American University. We'll be right back after these short messages. Welcome back to Facing the Future. I'm your host, Bob Bixby, and I'm talking with Tom Kahn. He is the director of the American University Center for Congressional and Presidential Studies and a 20-year veteran of the House Budget Committee, where he served as the committee's Democratic staff director for 20 years. When we left off, Tom, we were talking about the congressional power of the purse and how it has been eroding. And you want to bring into the program here our guest speaker, James Madison. He couldn't be here, but he sent you a note. What did he say?
Yes. through telepathy, President Madison sent me a quote from the Federalist Papers, from Federalist number 58. And Federalist number 58, President Madison, he wasn't president at the time, was trying to describe why the power of the purse being given to Congress was so important. And mind you, again, these people who wrote the Constitution were people who had just overthrown the yoke of a king. And they wanted the power of the people, the most powerful. They wanted the people to have the power over the government. And they saw the power of the purse as the most powerful weapon or tool by which the people could control the executive branch. And President Madison, or James Madison, wrote, and I'm quoting you here, the power of over the purse may be regarded as the most complete and effectual weapon with which any constitution can arm the representatives of the people. Now, think about those words for President Madison. When he says to arm the people, he uses his word. Arm is a very military term. And then he says it is a weapon, which obviously is a military term. He used these words very deliberately. What he was really trying to convey was the power of the purse is a damn powerful tool. And it's something that is being given to the people, to the people's representative in Congress. And that's why, Bob, the question you were asking about the power the president has been exercising over spending is really vitiating that which was designed by James Madison and by the founders. It was the idea that Congress, not the president, should have that power.
And there was a case. I think maybe you were at the House Budget Committee by that time, but there was a line item veto.
Absolutely.
Where it was given to the president and right. President Clinton, and it went to the Supreme Court, and they said
right.
that the line item veto was unconstitutional. And the reason why is for a lot of technical reasons. It did not go through the constitutional process, and that it effectively gave the president a unilateral right to change appropriations laws. And they said that was outside the constitutional framework.
Absolutely right.
So, to take that up to the present case of the rescissions, or we didn't talk about pocket rescissions, but that's another abomination we don't need to go into the details of. But if the president simply refuses to spend money, that's changing an appropriations law. And I don't see how that could be considered constitutional in light of Supreme Court precedent on the line item veto case.
We'll agree.
All right. So I want to switch gears now. You have been teaching for several years at American University and now leading the Center for Congressional and Presidential Studies there. And I'm just wondering what is the attitude? I mean, younger people are going to inherit all the fallout from the stuff that we've been talking about. Do you sense an awareness of that subject from younger people that you deal with?
It's a great question, Bob, and I wish the answer is yes. The honest answer is very few students are aware or think about the debt or deficits. In their mind, it does not affect them very directly. They don't think about it. They're not aware of the dangers. They're not aware of its growth. And I think this goes, and irony is, they're the ones that are going to have to pick up the pieces. In every class I teach, I go through it laboriously the growth of the deficits, the growth of the debt, the dangers in terms of higher interest rates, higher inflation, lower growth, and the consequences if the debt keeps growing. And I even joke, I said, our generation had a big party, and you guys are going to have to pay for it. But the truth of the matter is, it's not on their radar screen. And this goes to a broader problem, which is that I don't think deficits and debt are on the radar screen of enough Americans. I just don't think people are concerned about it. I don't think people are aware of the facts. And I think we all have a responsibility, all of us, and I try to do it with my students, to teach them what are the stakes involved and what are the consequences if no action is taken, and why it is so vitally important. It's still not too late. It's still not too late to address the deficit and debt, but it will be too late once we truly hit a debt crisis. Because once we truly hit a debt crisis, when the stock market crashes, when interest rates go through the roof, when unemployment goes way up, and then we're being told you're going to have to cut spending and raise taxes, you're in the middle of an economic crisis. That is the worst time to do anything like that. And hopefully, we'll have the wherewithal to take action before a crisis takes place. But so I'm going a little beyond your question, but I guess the real bottom line is I think it's more important than ever to do the education that groups like, and I should have said this before, Concord Coalition has done a great job of educating kids. Concord Coalition comes to my class every semester and goes through the budget process, goes through the budget selection process where they weigh the different consequences of more spending, more taxes, less spending, less taxes. And it's a wonderful exercise. And when these kids are done with it, they get it. They really do. So I salute the Concord Coalition for the work that it's been doing, and not just on that exercise in schools, but all around the country, by the way, in the different programs Concord has been running. And we just have to do even more of that.
Yeah, I appreciate the compliment, and we enjoy doing it every year with your classes at American University. And yeah, I mean, because I think the public needs to be aware, and it's so difficult to we've got raising interest costs, people finding it harder to afford a home, and the debt is very much becoming an affordability issue, to use a term that's been thrown around quite a bit on this campaign trail. People don't necessarily connect it to the debt, but it is certainly interwoven.
Absolutely. Just a simple example, and you couldn't be more right. This year, the federal government is going to have to borrow $2 trillion, not $2 billion, $2 trillion in order to keep the government running. That means we're spending $2 trillion more than we're taking in revenue. Now, when the government goes out to borrow $2 trillion, it's competing with the private sector. If you have a credit card bill, I mean, you're also borrowing money. If you're going to buy a house, you're also borrowing money. Well, guess what? You're competing against Uncle Sam because you're borrowing money and so is Uncle Sam. You are therefore paying higher interest rates because you've got to compete against them. So it has real life consequences every day for people.
Yeah, and I'd like to think that the way to, kind of up the attention to this is through campaigns. If you had people actually campaigning on the dangers of the debt, so far we really don't see that. It's more of, what's your favorite excuse? Blame the other side, point fingers.
The last real good politician that talked a lot about the debt, last two, one was Ross Perot, and the other was your former boss, Paul Tsongas.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, I think that's, one thing people need to do is get educated on this subject and just try asking people about it. On the campaign trail. Tom, we're going to have to leave it there. I've really enjoyed talking with you. It's been very enlightening and maybe a little bit frightening, but your perspective over those years on the Hill is really quite valuable. And please say hello to James Madison for me. It was nice of him to drop in through you and channel his thoughts to us. Thank you for tuning in. You've been listening to Facing the Future. I'm your host, Bob Bixby, and I have been talking with Tom Kahn. He is the director of the Center for Congressional and Presidential Studies at American University. I'll be back next week with another edition of Facing the Future.